What's going on, guys? Will Sherlin again with Gutter Fighting Secrets Tactical Podcast. So today we have a really special guest. His name is Brian Jones. Brian is the head instructor at Valhalla Jiu-Jitsu Academy, and Brian, that is in Frankfort. Which state are you in?
Kentucky.
Frankfort, Kentucky. That's what I thought, man. I wanted to make sure though. And Brian, you are a third degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, as well as having studied judo, and I believe you also have a black belt in judo.
I do.
And you also have experience in other martial arts: boxing, kickboxing, wrestling, taekwondo, kempo. You've even actually traveled to Iceland to train in traditional Viking grappling art of Glima. Am I saying that right?
Yes, it's called Glima.
That's pretty badass, dude. I definitely want to get into that with you because I know I'm certainly interested in that, having Viking blood in me myself, and some of our viewers are definitely going to be interested in that as well. In addition to his martial credentials, now Brian is also a professor, like an actual professor at an actual college, and you have a PhD in exercise science from the University of Kentucky. You are also the state director of National Strength Conditioning Association, NSCA. You sit currently on the NSCA Kentucky Advisory Board. Wow, dude. And he is the North American Director of International Institute of Martial Arts and Sciences, IMAS. Brian is NSCA Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist, personal trainer, CPT, Tactical Strength and Conditioning Facilitator, and USA Weightlifting Certified Club and Sports Performance Coach. Wow. CrossFit Level 1, World Kettlebell Club, Certified Fitness Trainer, Certified Functional Movement Specialist. You've worked with clients of all different types, all different fitness levels in martial arts, as well as weightlifting and conditioning in general. You also have served as strength and conditioning coach for high schools, colleges, professional athletes. You've trained military personnel, law enforcement personnel, tactical units in both fitness and defensive tactics. Dude, very, very impressive resume, man. I am thrilled to have you on. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Well, thanks for having me on.
Pleasure is all mine.
Just the only thing that I would update is that I'm not currently the NSCA state director. I can sort of pass that on to someone else, but just for I did that for several years.
The time comes to pass the torch, but that's really impressive, man. So you also, in addition to all of these things that you're doing, you also run a Instagram and a website called Old School Jiu-Jitsu. Now,
yes.
For the guys out there who haven't yet subscribed to that and aren't yet following you, after this interview, I guarantee you're going to want to start to follow Brian. But can you tell us a little bit about Old School Jiu-Jitsu? What are you guys doing on there?
Sure. So Old School Jiu-Jitsu is, in some ways, it's a reaction to sort of the split in Jiu-Jitsu that's come about in the past, let's say, 15, 20 years in the United States, or, at least since I've been doing it. I've been training for about 20 some odd years. I think I started in 1998 or something. I had a judo background before that and continued to train, but I started in jiu-jitsu in 1998, and I've just noticed a big shift in the ways that jiu-jitsu is taught. And so there's sort of a sports side, and then there's the more traditional self-defense Vale Tudo side. Mm-hmm. That was the way that I was taught. And it's become so pronounced now that it's almost like there's two different arts. Mm-hmm. So the point of Old School Jiu-Jitsu is to sort of get back to the roots of Jiu-Jitsu as a fighting art. And we kind of have three really big we've got three platforms that we're looking to do. First is to inform and instruct people on jiu-jitsu as a fighting art. So the fighting mindset, self-defense, all that as the primary goal of jiu-jitsu training. The second thing is the history of jiu-jitsu. So we like to get into the historical part of jiu-jitsu, like how it was developed and the old school guys that sort of put everything on the line to prove it. And then we look at the personal development side of things, how jiu-jitsu sort of transforms people and that the lessons that you learn on the mats translate to everyday life.
You know, when I first got into jiu-jitsu, man, my professor told me that this is going to help you in everything else you do. And I was like, okay, you know, I had martial experience already, but nothing could really prepare me for the level of intensity that you find in jiu-jitsu. And I really do agree with you wholehearted on that subject, man, that you really, for the guys out there who haven't trained yet, it really does kind of tone everything else down in your life and make you really a better, not only a better warrior, but a better person in general. Now, how do you think that kind of comes about? Is it through the sheer intensity of it? Is it also through kind of the bonding aspect of it? What kind of makes that so specific to jiu-jitsu?
I think it's a multifaceted thing. I don't think there's any one thing. I think you kind of touched on a whole bunch of stuff there. The one thing that I noticed, first of all, is that there's no hiding your skill level. There's no faking it. The mat's like the ultimate lie detector. If you get on there and you're not very good, it shows. If you haven't been training, it shows. If you there's just no way to lie. If you're in a bad mood, it comes out. Your personality comes out. So it essentially is just going to be just the most honest thing you could possibly do. So that alone is something that's real, and that's what's lacking in a lot of martial arts. Another thing that you mentioned is the bonding aspect of it. You know, we live in a society where people just dwell online exclusively. They don't have any sort of relationships with real people, like real relationships that are sort of built through trial and adversity. And I think that you get that when you go and you spend hours and hours beating people up and having them beat you up, and then, you know, hugging and grabbing a beer afterwards. And it's just sort of a little tribal sort of an atmosphere that touches something in us that's really primal.
It really is, man. You won't find a closer group of guys than a bunch of guys who all beat the crap out of each other and then afterwards are all friends. It's a special thing. Now, let me just ask you this. From your martial background, you came from being a judo player into jiu-jitsu. Do you think the bond is even kind of more intense in jiu-jitsu, even so more so than judo even?
I'm not sure. I think I've spent more time in jiu-jitsu, in a jiu-jitsu specific environment. I think that a lot of these things, judo can have that same effect, that people who train together hard in judo are going to get a similar effect. So I can't really speak to the fact that judo doesn't have that. But, I definitely felt that in judo coming in prior to it, and that was just extended as I got deeper and deeper into jiu-jitsu. Judo was a great base art for me. I still think it's an amazing martial art, especially from the takedown perspective. It's kind of helped inform a lot of what I do, and my priority on takedowns as an important part of the fight.
Yeah, and you don't find that enough in a lot of jiu-jitsu schools, is the takedown emphasis. I mean, if we're going to assume that, we want to get the fight to the ground, how else do you do that besides takedowns, right? And a lot of schools aren't really focusing enough on takedowns. A lot of classes you'll go in and it starts on the ground. You guys are kind of more starting from the feet. Do you guys start from the feet every class, or?
We start from the feet about 99% of the time, Maybe 95, unless there's some reason specifically not to. Some nights the mats will be really, really crowded, or we're working on a particular drill or something like that. But we do break falls in every class. We do a takedown. We do takedown training in every class. And then we almost always start from the feet, just because the comfort level has to be there. Like you said, everything, most fights will end up on the ground, but all of them are going to start standing up.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's possible that you could be assaulted while, sunbathing or sitting in a chair, but it's not likely. You're probably going to be on your feet. And the takedown, I think, has lost. That's one of the things that I discuss in a book that I just put out called the Old School Jiu-Jitsu Manifesto, about the way that the takedown emphasis has been sort of lost from jiu-jitsu, and it's really a function of this sort of turn towards sport, where takedowns are done, first of all, on a mat, and second of all, they don't get much in the way. You can't win that way. So a lot of people just forego that entirely and just sit down. And so it turns into this weird seated thing.
Yeah.
Because the person who sits down, if somebody sits down, if my opponent sits down in a tournament and I don't engage him, then I'm stalling.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, the burden is on me to then engage somebody who's on the ground, as opposed to having to fight for the takedown. And I think that's a disservice, because, you could become a champion sport jiu-jitsu athlete and never know a takedown.
Now, do you think sports jiu-jitsu translates to the street?
I think it does. I don't think so. When I say sport jiu-jitsu, I just mean really jiu-jitsu that's training is driven exclusively by tournament jiu-jitsu. So whenever the sport rules dictate the curriculum, everything is about points and advantages and sweeps. And there's nothing wrong with competing in tournaments, and I actually think it's a good thing to put yourself under that kind of stress. However, a lot of the tournament tactics and tips and habits that you build, if you do that exclusively, will pretty much get you murdered in a street fight.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as someone who's an elite level athlete in jiu-jitsu is probably not going to have too much trouble with an average person in a street fight. But you could say that about any elite level athlete, whether they're a wrestler, a football player, or whatever. But if you think about the average person who's not an elite level athlete, who comes into a school looking primarily for self-defense, and what they get is a discussion of how to sit down most effectively,
mm-hmm.
and then how to score advantages and in positions that are going to leave them open to strikes, and those never really addressed.
Yeah, and a lot of schools aren't discussing striking at all, or defending against, the ground and pound or whatever. A lot of schools you go in, and whether it's just simply because of the competition aspect or whatever, you don't get any of that self-defense stuff. And I think that's such an injustice to guys who want to train for self-defense.
For sure. If you ask most people why they're training, they're going to, or why they decided to start training, and this is something that's been mentioned online in numerous interviews, even with top-level competitors. And most people who walk through the door don't come in because they want to be a tournament competitor.
Right.
Maybe only 10 or 15% of the people will actually ever compete, and even fewer will actually do it more than once. What they want is a way to defend themselves, and B, a way to get in shape, and then maybe something new to try, so they might come into the martial aspect of it. So the tournament component is really a small fraction of the motivating factor in why people start jiu-jitsu. And considering that most people don't push up to those elite levels, then that is, again, doing them a disservice to just immediately start them without this fundamental base of self-defense.
I completely agree, man. And I always say that it would be best if schools were to do, classes specifically for their competitors and then, other classes as well. I think a lot of it has to do with student retention, to be honest. I mean, if you bring your students in there and you make them do hard takedowns every day and push them hard, a lot of guys aren't going to want to continue to train in that. What do they say? It takes 1,000 white belts to make one blue belt or something like that, right? So, student retention is a big thing in modern jiu-jitsu schools, which is an unfortunate kind of way that it's gone. But, can you talk about that subject at all? Because it kind of fascinates me. Like, what is your, from 98 when you got into jiu-jitsu till, 2020 almost now, what's it been like to see that level of instruction, the level of training kind of go down incrementally?
Well, so it's kind of a complex topic. When I first started, I don't really think that anyone was trying to retain students at the school I started. I mean, we came and we beat the crap out of each other, and if you came back, then you stayed, and eventually somebody learned your name. It was one of those kind of schools, and I don't necessarily think that's the right way to train all the time, because I got too many injuries training like that. However, retention is a critical thing. I mean, if you're going to operate a school, then you have to have a student base that is going to support it. So you need to retain people, and also you have to, there are people that are going to come in there and they like the hard training, they like that intensity and all that sort of thing. Then there are other people who maybe that freaks them out at first, but they could be built up to that level. Mm-hmm. So I think that the key is a progressive overload of this intensity, and that way that these things can be introduced in a fashion where you're not necessarily sparring full contact, your second night.
Right.
It's most of the time. I mean, you could train really hard. You can train takedowns and train hard takedowns, but you have to work up to it. Just like, boxing, if you do punches, I mean, you have to work up to it with drills. And once you do that, it's not any more dangerous. What people think is really dangerous doesn't have to be that dangerous. It just needs to be approached in a sane manner, yeah. I guess, with drills and a progressive system so that people can gradually become acclimated.
Now, what do you think about guys drilling exclusively? Like, I know in some schools, white belts until you get like your second stripe, you're not allowed to actually go live. In other schools, you go live your first or second night. Can you give any expertise as to what your thoughts are on that whole, working them up to actually fighting?
I can see the point that on both sides. I'll start out by saying that, and I'll argue for the having students go live right away. So that's what I do.
Okay.
The reason that students are typically not allowed to go live until they get their first or second stripe is they want the role to be technical and not just a brawl, and they're probably trying to keep the injuries down just a little bit. The way I do it is I like to have the students experience what it's like to be in the driver's seat. So it depends on your gym culture. Our gym culture is very supportive. We have people, we do go really hard, but we also have people that are willing to help out other students. So sometimes you'll go into a school and it's all about the competitors, and then all the white belts are pretty much just fresh meat. Mm-hmm. So they come in and, they get sort of smashed and all that. And then, so that instructors are trying to maybe keep them away from that experience right away. But if you can put new students with more experienced students, and not have the two newest people roll that night, because they're probably going to have each other and, trying to throw each other through the window and, and that kind of stuff. So if you have a more experienced person sparring with a less experienced person so that they can they can feel the positions and they're working with them, and they're getting used to feeling what the pressure's like, because that's something that you can't see when you watch the UFC.
Yeah.
Right. You don't know why they can't stand up until you have somebody lay on you, and then you realize why they can't stand up, because you can't move. So, I like to put those people in the driver's seat. That way, when I explain the techniques, then I can reference their experience. So I can say, hey, do you remember when you were here and this kept happening? Like they kept moving around your legs and then smashing you. You know how uncomfortable that was? Well, this is how you stop it. And so they have a frame of reference as opposed to no experience live.
Yeah.
So I try to keep my students, like, maybe not rolling with submissions or anything, but at least positional drilling. Like, hey, I want you to put the person on their back and then try to get around their legs. And then if you do, try to hold them there and just give them specific goals, but get them moving, the first night.
Positional sparring is so key too, I think, and a lot of schools, aren't really doing that these days. But for those of you guys out there who don't know, positional sparring is, like Brian was saying, you start from, the person, you're turtled up and you're on your back, the other person's on your back, and how to get them off, and how to reverse a certain position, or you start from, in the guard or something like that, and it really, it makes you a better fighter overall. You guys are doing a lot of positional sparring, it sounds like.
We do a lot of positional sparring. I'm a big fan. I mean, we do quite a bit of full sparring, but I find that the positional sparring is actually a lot more exhausting, because when you're sparring, you get those rest points. So if you escape mount, you roll the guy, let's say you end up in his guard, he's tired, you're tired, and you'll both kind of stall. Well, then if you're in the middle for 5 minutes, and every time you escape the mount, then someone else gets on top of you, that's your reward for escaping, is you get mounted again. It's actually a lot more exhausting. You got a lot more time in that position, and that's really important, because as you get better, maybe you're really good at keeping people off your back. Well, when somebody gets on your back, if you don't practice defending from that position, then you're screwed, because you haven't had anybody get on your back in a while, because you've gotten really good at defending it. There's always going to be somebody out there who's going to beat your defenses and take your back. So having time in those positions from the bad positions is a critical way to train.
And now you mentioned about being tired. When you're tired, everything kind of goes out the window. It's like the classic analogy, everything goes out the window after the first punch. Now, tactical strength training is something I've been interested in a long time. I started out just lifting weights and doing cardio and stuff, and I kind of along the way found that, yeah, I was getting bigger and stronger, but it wasn't necessarily helping my martial arts at all. In fact, the more muscle I had on me, kind of the tighter I would feel overall, the less I'd move. Can you give us, kind of your concept on what exactly is tactical strength training for self-defense and combatives?
Well, it's a little, I guess it's one of those things that a lot of people are going to find different ways. In terms of being fit for self-defense, you really want, if you're going to be training for self-defense, the key thing is to be sturdy enough to not get injured all the time. I think one of the big benefits of strength training is just that it makes your body more sturdy. So your joints are sturdier, your back's less likely to get injured. So even a moderate amount of strength training is going to help injury prevention, and that's going to give you more time to train, less time off. You're going to be on the mats more. The other thing is you want to try to maximize your weight to strength or weight to power ratio. So I mean your power to weight ratio. Sorry, if you want to be strong pound for pound. So somebody who's strong but also has a lot of mass to carry around, even if that mass is muscle, is going to get tired a lot faster. Mm-hmm. So there's going to be an optimal strength and size ratio. And I've been heavier and I've been lighter, and I find that I operate best right around 200 pounds. Mm-hmm. That gives me, that way I'm strong for my weight, but I'm also mobile. I don't get overly tired. So you'll find that if you add a lot of muscle mass, you'll tend to be less mobile and more, and you'll get tired a lot faster.
Everybody sees the classic, Arnold Schwarzenegger in Commando and, those movies in the 80s, the bodybuilders, and they kind of, for a long time, I think we kind of thought that's what a warrior is, right? Conan, like somebody who's just jacked out of their mind. But when you really look at, actual warriors, Green Berets, boxers, they're a lot more cut. They don't have as much muscle mass on them. So to your point, I really think that that's a kind of something that's a never-ending battle, right? Having enough muscle mass to where you're strong and effective, but not too much where, like you said, you get tired and you're slow. And I think also training a lot, it definitely, the more you train, the more cardio you do, the less muscle mass you're going to have on you. Is there a fine line that we can walk as warriors between, keeping enough muscle that we look good and then also doing all that crap load of cardio and everything, in your opinion?
Well, I think that if you have a good diet and you do any resistance training and you also do jiu-jitsu or whatever sort of cardio fighting, because there's a lot of cardio in jiu-jitsu. I mean, I know people that roll know this, but other people that don't. There's a lot of conditioning, long rounds for aerobic or anaerobic conditioning. There's going to be sprint type. It's just an all-around conditioning thing. Plus, you're pushing and pulling on people, so it's resistance training as well. Mm-hmm. So somebody who eats well, does jiu-jitsu, and lifts weights is going to look good. They're not going to really have to worry too much about their aesthetics. In terms of the, walking that line about the training, what it comes down to is that if you're training a lot, you're going to have to find a balance between training and recovery. So if you're rolling 4 or 5 nights a week, you're not going to be able to lift weights very much and still recover. So you have to put one of those, you have to prioritize. You may only need a couple nights a week of strength training, short sessions, small, that sort of thing, or a couple kettlebell sessions, or however you like to train. But the main thing is that you don't want to try to overreach your body's recovery capacity. Because if we think about training for self-defense, it doesn't do you much good if you do all this training for self-defense and then someone kicks your ass when you leave because you're so sore and beat up and broken from your training that you can't fight them.
Yeah.
So
always leave a little bit in the tank, I guess.
Exactly. That way it's much better on you, like physically and psychologically, if you try to save your max efforts to do those just intermittently, the kind of build up to those.
How about doing cardio outside of training? If you're the typical jiu-jitsu guy and you're obsessed now and you're doing jiu-jitsu, 3, 4, 5 nights a week, would you suggest, running on the side, doing some Stairmaster, something like that?
That's going to help you. I will say this. If you're in good cardio shape and you don't do jiu-jitsu, no amount of cardio is going to help you with your jiu-jitsu conditioning. Because I get this a lot where people are, talking about how they've done this or that in this Ironman or this CrossFit competition. It's like, you kind of joke with them a little bit. You hold them cross-eyed. It's like, okay, burpee your way out of this one. They're always going to get tired because it's new and it's unfamiliar. Once you are training, then you can add that stuff in on top and it makes you better. So as long as it's, again, balanced and your recovery's there. So what I typically program is not so much long distance type running and conditioning. First of all, like my joints, I really despise running. That's just a personal thing. But I do a lot of jump rope, I do like distant, kettlebell swings for time, and body weight exercise circuits. So I like circuit training, and I like using jiu-jitsu related skills as conditioning circuits. So maybe the stand and base, if you do 10 backfall stand and base, and then you go into another thing, and then you pop this around into a circuit, you can get a really good workout that's very jiu-jitsu specific.
I like that whole jiu-jitsu martial arts specific workout thing, and it really does get your heart rate up there. Now, what about guys who want to maybe come into jiu-jitsu and train 2 nights a week? They say, look, I really love weightlifting, or I really love, whatever it is on the side, CrossFit, and I don't want to give that up for jiu-jitsu, but I want to learn jiu-jitsu. Is there a happy medium that we can achieve for guys who don't want to train all the time?
Absolutely. I mean, the thing that any training is better than no training. And at some point, there's going to be too much training that your body can't handle it. So within that range, you're going to have to figure out what's more important to you. You can definitely learn jiu-jitsu training 2 nights a week. You could learn it training 1 night a week. It'd be really hard to get enough repetition. But, there are times when life gets in the way and you may be down to 1 night a week.
Yeah.
But it's 2 nights a week, I would think, is kind of a bare minimum for people to really advance. And then that 3 to 4 night a week tends to be about optimal for most people. Mm-hmm. And then after that, it just obviously, the more you do, the better you're going to get. It's just that you can't train like a maniac every session. Some of those sessions are going to need to be more technical. Some are more going to be sparring sessions. So you just have to mix up the kind of training. But definitely twice a week. I mean, if you want to do another fitness thing, if jiu-jitsu is not your primary thing, you can still learn the basics of jiu-jitsu 2 nights a week.
Just takes a lot of time. That's the thing about jiu-jitsu is, I've been around and I've seen them, and I think that it's probably the most effective one-on-one fighting art that there is, but it takes a long time to master it, man.
It does, but it's like anything else. Anything that you get into, you realize how little you know about it once you actually dive into it. It's that that unconscious incompetence and conscious incompetence. You start to realize that this thing is way bigger than I ever thought it was, and you're going to get out of it what you put into it in terms of results, just like you would any other skill, whether it be shooting or boxing or anything.
Yeah, absolutely, and you never stop learning, and that's the thing about another thing about jiu-jitsu I love is it's a really kind of it really teaches warrior ethos is that you never stop learning. No matter how good you are or become, there's still so much more to learn.
Oh, absolutely. It's really infinite, and the fact that it's there are certain fundamental things about jiu-jitsu, and then once you get past that point, that's where it becomes fun to do the sport moves and train, as long as you keep that sort of fighting mindset in mind. And kind of to go back briefly to that is that I'm not anti-tournament jiu-jitsu or anti-sport. I think that it's fun. It's something that people enjoy doing. It's a stress drill, if nothing else. It's a way to meet people, but it has to be balanced with a healthy dose of sort of real self-defense tournament jiu-jitsu. I mean, it's a real self-defense jiu-jitsu, and otherwise it gets to be, you're going to do under stress what you do the most.
Yeah.
That's just, you're going to revert to it, and that's what's going to happen. So you have to have that background.
I couldn't agree more. And, obviously jiu-jitsu comes from the samurai and true, warriors who were using this to kill other people, kill their enemies, and survive through freaking hardcore battles. And, not, like you said, not to knock sports jiu-jitsu or anything like that, but I think that a lot of schools don't have that, life or death mentality in mind when they teach it. You see a lot of guys, bouncing on their knees and stuff and doing all this aerobic stuff, but on the concrete, it might not be as forgiving as the mats. Do you guys typically discuss that type of stuff during your classes as far as, hey, the street, one way, and then for in here on the mats, another way?
I do always. I always introduce every technique with, whether or not it's applicable to a self-defense situation.
Awesome.
And what the situation would be, like how you could get hit from there. And a lot of this stuff teaches itself as we put some gloves on and then we grapple with punches. You learn the positions that are going to work for you to get hit in, and you find that the basic stuff, as you always kind of go back to it. As you get better, you can modify some of the sports stuff to work in an environment with punches. But then again, it becomes a situation where you have to ask yourself, okay, why am I still on the ground? Anytime I have a chance to get up, I should get up, because this isn't a mat. If I'm outside, this is pavement. Every time I shrimp, every time I scoot, doesn't matter if I do an awesome sweep, I still just took a bunch of skin off of me. Mm-hmm. So, or possibly ground broken glass into my skin. So absolutely. I don't necessarily want to be on the ground. It's just that people will talk about that in some of the other arts with like, well, you don't want to go to the ground. It's like, well, that's true in some cases, but the only way to not be able to go to the ground, or the only way to be able to not fight on the ground, is to be able to fight on the ground.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know how to fight on the ground, then you don't have the choice. If I can fight somebody on the ground, then I can hold them there. I can get up if I want to, because I'm in control of that situation. The same with the takedowns. If I don't trade takedowns, I don't have the choice of whether or not the fight stays standing.
And that was
the best option.
Yeah, no, go ahead, please.
I was to say the best option for me. I mean, I love grappling. I love jiu-jitsu, but if I get into a fight, I'm going to try to throw the guy as hard as I can on the concrete and stomp him on the head.
Yeah.
That's it. It's just like that. That's the most effective way, most efficient, because I don't want to bust my knees up grappling around the ground if I don't have to.
And you hear a lot of these RBC reality-based combatives guys really knocking jiu-jitsu. Well, if he pulls guard, I'll just, hit him in the nuts, or, I'll just bite him and then get back up. But, I think once you really get into grappling, you see it's not that simple. Can you touch on these? And there's less and less of them as we, see how effective jiu-jitsu is, MMA and everything, but there's still the guys out there, reality-based, quote-unquote, that are really knocking jiu-jitsu. Can you touch on that for us? I mean, what are your thoughts on that whole methodology of, quote-unquote, reality-based combatives versus, integrating MMA and jiu-jitsu into that?
Sure. Obviously the people that say those sorts of things aren't familiar with jiu-jitsu, because jiu-jitsu is, a lot of the movements that they use are based on reaction. So biting someone, poking them in the eyes, hitting them in the groin, that sort of thing, those are pain-based things, right? So they're not based on physics. They're based on my interpretation of whether or not I think that's bad enough for me to leave you alone, right? It doesn't matter whether you believe doesn't matter what your pain tolerance is. If you can't get up, you can't get up, right? If you can't get your hand back, you can't get your hand back. So the key thing is that a lot of them don't understand is that they don't have the option. And a lot of times it requires sort of the consent of the other person to let go. Like if I poke someone in the eye, that's not going to make them magically burst into flames. That's just going to make them, I've been poked in the eye before. I didn't stop. I've been kicked in the nuts before. I didn't stop. People get bitten and they don't stop. Yeah. And the last thing that you want to do against someone who can hold you there for hours if they feel like it in the mount is to remind them that they can bite you. That's just not a good strategy. if you're really trained in jiu-jitsu, maybe somebody's on top of you and they're big or whatever, and you bite them, and it makes enough space for you to get your knee in because they pull back. That's okay. That's different. That's adding in a skill that everybody can do. I mean, everybody's been biting things since they were weaned. You know, I've been eating for most of my life, so I can bite something. So I can use those techniques as add-ons to this framework that's based on structure and physics, and those things will work, but only if I understand this other stuff. So you can't build a system based around like weird techniques and bites and grabs and groin grabs. So it's just it's very subjective. And I mean, you know, if someone's really dedicated or really intoxicated, or they just don't care, you can bite a big hunk out of them and they're still going to fight you. It is, you know, you can break their arm and they're not going to quit. And you see it in the UFC all the time. Yeah. It's just because I damage you a little bit doesn't mean that it's over.
Yeah, and you know, people who are exclusively training in arts like Krav, and I've gotten a lot of heat for how much I hate on Krav, and it's not because, you know, I think it's totally ineffective, but like you were saying, I don't think building a system on, you know, biting and eye gouging alone is going to do the job. But people who train in those cooperative martial arts really don't seem to understand the way that actual fights work, which is, again, something that's great about Jiu-Jitsu and grappling in general, is that every time you go live and you get to fight. And it's just so much more, it gives you so much more experience without having to actually go into the street and find some hobo and fight him, you know what I mean?
Exactly. There's no way to learn how to fight without fighting. Yeah. I mean, you just can't do it. So, you know, short of getting into a full-fledged brawl, you have to simulate the fight as safely as you possibly can and as realistically as you possibly can. So that's, you know, jiu-jitsu and the MMA drills, and then you take the mindset of, okay, this isn't a sport where there's a referee, there could be multiple opponents, there could be a weapon involved. So if you add that into the training methods that jiu-jitsu and mixed martial arts already have, then you've got a really effective way to train.
Yeah, so I like what you're saying there, man, is you start with, you know, grappling and MMA type stuff, striking, and then you add in the dirty stuff, you add in the weapons, you know, disarms and retention, and you add in that other stuff once you've kind of built a more competent fighter.
Exactly. If you know how to fight, right, then, you know, biting somebody or poking them in the eye or kicking them in the groin or doing something like that can give you a slight advantage whenever your other techniques are failing, because they do hurt, right, most people, and they can provoke a reaction. And so if a reaction is all you need, if space is all you need, and you can utilize that space because you know jiu-jitsu or you know some sort of actual martial art, you know, if you know how to throw hands because you're a good boxer, and you do all those things that it's illegal in boxing, like grabbing the head or pulling their shirt over their head or all that kind of stuff, then, you know, it becomes more combative.
Now, I meant to get into this right away, but I definitely got sidetracked. The Viking Grappling, is that more of a street, quote-unquote, street-based combative system? What is the deal with this stuff, man?
So, Glima is a really old medieval Viking martial art, and it's become, when I trained, I went to Iceland in 2009, and I went again in 2019, but I didn't get to train Glima then, and I trained with someone who competes as a sport. Now, there are some other instructors that have been, I don't know if it's like a reenactment or if it's different in different countries, but there's some other ones that is like different types of Glima. So there's the traditional Glima where you wear this belt and you do the throws like as a folk wrestling sport. And then there are other instructors who are teaching it more from sort of, I guess, a historical reenactment type of a deal, where it's more like just freestyle grappling and things like that. But the way that it's practiced now as a sport, there's a harness, like a leather belt that goes around and over one of your thighs. Your opponent takes a grip on your waist and your thigh. You take the same one. Then you move in a circle. And when the referee blows the whistle, you try to throw them so that they touch the ground with something other than their hands and forearms, or from their knees to their feet. So if you went on all fours, it wouldn't count. But if you make them touch their head, their back, or anything, then you win. Unless you also touch the ground too. So you try to throw them while remaining standing.
And basically just hurt them as much as possible on the way down.
Right. Well, in the sport version now, there's not. They actually do it on a hardwood floor, which is there's no mats in it, or outside, and so the impact is not as bad as you would think, because people are trying to not fall on top of you. Because that they'll end up losing. It kind of cancels out their point. So I think it's kind of like Scottish backhold and some of those other traditional styles. They all developed from combative arts. And so for the history that I've read, the people that I've talked to, it's kind of like once you get close to somebody in combat, they're going to have a scabbard on, and they're going to be in close, and you're trying to throw them down. And the last thing that you want on a battlefield, where everybody's carrying swords, is to be on the ground with the other person standing. So most of those folk styles are based almost exclusively on throwing the person so that you can kill them with your sword. And
Interesting.
It's a really fun sport, and there's some big high impact throws, and I could see how it would have developed out of sort of training from a close quarters. You try to swing with your sword, suddenly you're jammed up, you're too close, you're grabbing, and then you're trying to throw them down, and then get your knife out or whatever and finish them off.
That reminds me a lot of like the judo training they gave our guys in World War II, with bayonets and everything.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it comes down to, again, like what I was saying about the fight philosophy is this: if you want to be the guy who's standing, and if you're on the ground, you want to be the guy who's on top. And if you're on the guard, was designed as a position of the best way to be in a shitty position. So it's gotten to be sort of an art in and of itself in the sports side, which is cool. But, from a combative standpoint, it's the last place you actually want to be, is on your back, because your situational awareness is gone. You've got gravity on your side. It's just making the best of a bad situation. So from the judo perspective, is the same type thing. So you throw them, and then you either kick them with your boot, or you bayonet them, or you shoot them, or whatever, while they're on the ground. So you're trying to hit them with the earth, which people don't realize how damaging those throws can be until they get thrown. And if you don't know how to fall, that can put you out pretty quick.
Yeah, I've taken some nasty falls myself, and it's not fun. It actually, I think once a guy really gets thrown down and then gets hurt from that impact, it puts kind of a fear in him. So the next time he goes to do that takedown training, it almost makes it more difficult. Can you give us any advice for guys who maybe got injured on a takedown, or kind of have that psychological break in themselves, and they're thinking, I don't want to do takedowns, or even when they do it, they push through it, they have that hesitation. Is there a way to kind of train that out of us?
Absolutely. So judo does a really good job of this, and I think that modern, even some schools that train takedowns in jiu-jitsu these days do less well. It's that you have to be comfortable with falling. And when I say that, I mean that you have to be literally comfortable with just jumping up in the air and taking a fall perfectly fine on your own. If you can get to that point, and then you also trust that your partner isn't going to smash you into the mat.
Mm-hmm.
And they can pull back. I think what happens is that there's a lack of falling ability because of not enough repetitions in break falls. Mm-hmm. Like in a judo class, you might do 100 break falls every class, at least. And then when you get thrown, your partner is going to pull up on your arm a little bit. Even in the sparring part of the randori, they're not going to try to smash you through the mat quite as much on every single throw as they would, if you're training more competition style. Mm. So if you can save the super hard throws, what ends up happening is that people aren't comfortable. When they aren't comfortable, they get stiff, and when they're stiff, people have to try harder to throw them, mm-hmm. and then instead of just accepting the fall, and because they're afraid of landing, they fight it, and then they end up getting injured because they make the other guy try too hard, and then they land awkwardly. So it's sort of like if every time somebody tried to put an arm bar on you, and you just wouldn't give up. It's like the throw is the submission. It's like and going and accepting that you've been thrown, and then figuring out what you're going to do when you hit the ground is the tapping out. Mm. At some point, there's just a point of no return, right? So if you're not training for a competition, I mean, in jiu-jitsu competitions anyway, it doesn't matter which way you land. In judo, they try to twist out to their stomachs to not get a score. But if you just accept it and land on your back, then you usually don't get hurt if you've practiced enough break falls and you can relax, tuck your chin. And again, you have to build a certain level of trust with the training partner. And it just comes back to repetitions of training time. So, doing balls and then, 50 repetitions of a throw in a class. I mean, that's unheard of in a lot of places, but that's like a minimal amount, that a judo school would do.
Now you talk about, training partners, having to trust your training partner. There are inevitably going to be in any school guys who come in that just want to hurt somebody, guys who got a bad attitude. Is there anything that you found over the years, short of having the head of the school kick them out? I mean, how do you deal with a guy like that who's not only there for blood, but there with like a chip on his shoulder?
Well, fortunately, a lot of that comes back to the gym culture, and that's dictated in large part by the instructor. As an instructor, you have to take an active role in creating and maintaining a gym culture that is that doesn't accept people like that. Mm. So, when people come in that way at our school, when people come in like that, first of all, they get asked to, you can usually tell, but you get asked to, we ask them, it's like, look, this isn't, we're trying to learn, this isn't the fighting part of it. And again, if that doesn't work, then sometimes people have to be kind of, and I don't mean this by an injury, but just broken,
Yeah.
Like they have to be broken like a horse or something, you have to like have somebody smash them, make them feel like they're nothing, and just crush their ego for, so if you get your gym enforcers or whatever on them and just be like, hey, just go over there and make this guy feel like he's a little kid. You know what I mean? Just for the whole round, just make him feel like he's a little kid. And don't let him quit, shame him into not quitting. And then after that, they have this moment of crisis, and they're either going to stay and they're going to be some of your best students and they're going to listen to you, or you're never going to come back. And it's just the easiest way to weed those people out. And then, if something develops later down the line, it just becomes an issue where the instructor or, the peers in the class need to have a discussion with that person, because, you have to trust them with your safety, or they can't be there, so you have to kick them out. They're not going to play by the rules.
So when we're talking about gym culture, I mean, how do guys out there who either have trained a little bit or not trained at all, but they've got that desire, they want to learn jiu-jitsu. What do you look for in a gym, in an instructor? What would be your guidance for somebody who really wants to get into this, but do it the right way in the right place?
Well, it's difficult to give a hard and fast set of guidelines, but I'll try my best here. The first thing is that everybody's different. I mean, I'm different, you're different. We all have different types of environments we'd like to train in. The only way that you're ever going to know is if you go give it a chance. Mm-hmm. So the first thing that you're going to have to do is try out the class, right? So you need to try out a class, see how you're treated, because what's on paper and what transpires in an actual class may be completely different. Mm. So if you try out the class, or if there's a trial period, take advantage of that and figure out if this is something you feel comfortable doing. So if nobody bothers to learn your name, everything is very, very disorganized, or nobody seems to care about your safety, that kind of thing, then that may not be the place for you. Or maybe it is. I don't know. There are people, obviously those people have, there's places for everyone. But I would say at a minimal level, I would look for somebody who's going to actually coach you and not just use you as a punching dummy, mm-hmm. which happens at a lot of schools. New guys, this is a new punching bag or a new throwing dummy. So you want to make sure that people there are looking out for your safety at the very least. And then you want to make sure that you're not that the instructor is legit, because a lot of places are fly by night and they pop up, so you might ask around and see what kind of reputation the person has. That's always a good one. But the biggest thing is just the presence, the being there. I would say visit a couple of schools, talk to the instructor, see what you think. People are generally a pretty good judge of. Unless someone's a complete swindler, which those people are out there, you can get a feel for how somebody is by talking to them. So just have a phone conversation. If they won't let you watch a class until you sign up, that's a problem. What's the secret? Right. We both know there's no secret. It's just training. It's just hours of training. So if they don't ever roll with people, that's kind of an issue. I get out on the mat and, win, lose, or draw, it's like I'm still in this. I'm 45 years old, and I still get out there. It doesn't matter how old they are, how good they are, or whatever. It's not like I'm going to just stop and be a sideline coach, because I do this because I love it.
What do you think about guys out there who, you've heard the horror stories about, you go into a school and you find out the guy's lying about having his black belt, or the guy's actually a brown belt and he just puts on a black belt to teach. Do you think that still kind of exists? Is that an actual thing?
I think it is. I don't know how common it is, but it's there's some websites out there that try to out those people. Yeah. It's kind of like the stolen valor of the jiu-jitsu community, I guess. They want to expose people so they're not getting defrauded, and it's not a big deal to go to a school. Like a lot of smaller clubs in smaller areas, they may not have access to a black belt, but it doesn't mean a brown belt can't teach you anything. Right. A brown belt's been training for a long time. So, there are some smaller clubs where people get their start, and their first instructor was super common back in the late 90s, early 2000s, to have a purple belt instructor. And as long as they know more than you and they're willing to teach you, then you can learn from them. So, but the biggest thing is the attitude that people have at the gym. So you want to make sure that you're not going to go and you're not going to get hurt every time because nobody cares. You're not going to catch MRSA because nobody's ever mopped the mat.
Yeah.
Just look around and see how it goes.
That's a big thing too, is hygiene. I know ringworm and all that is kind of a part of it, but you definitely want to go in there and make sure that they mop the mats and that the people there are taking care of their hygiene, because it can make life kind of difficult if they don't.
it's a very personal, in-your-face kind of activity. So I'm pretty strict when it comes to the hygiene. It's like if someone's so smelly that I won't spar with them, I'm not going to ask any of my students to.
Yeah.
So we just basically say, hey, dude, you stink. Why don't you go take a shower and come back when you're clean? So it's much better. I'd rather hurt someone's feelings than get someone a skin infection.
Yeah. Now, before we close out here, I got one more question that it's really popular right now, I've noticed, and that's the whole aspect about promotion. What is your philosophy on promoting guys? Is there a proper format to do it? I mean, do you hold promotion nights, or do you not hold promotion nights? When do you give out a stripe? Can you touch on that a little bit for us as your personal philosophy?
Well, there are a lot of different systems. Some of them are, I don't have a gigantic school, so I see what my students know on a regular basis. We go through a curriculum that is what I like to call sort of standardized light. It's not so standardized that, everybody's trying to be a clone, but we do have things that I want people to know for certain belt ranks. There's a time and grade. We have regular promotions. We do it quarterly. And then I have people spar. So, the promotion is basically a giant workout. So everybody spars with everybody in different positions and does different drills. And so I might ask, different people to spar. And so I use stripes. And, some people do, some people don't. I think it helps. There's a lot of time between belts. Mm-hmm. And it's just something that gives some incentive, towards the rank. It's a pat on the back to let you know that you're moving in the right direction. It's not necessary. And I'm not, so if people don't want to do it, that's fine. Some people have different criteria for stripes. Like you have a stripe test where you do demo the techniques. I don't think any of that's bad. Everybody's going to have their own sort of system. I think the basic idea is that there is, for me, a blue belt, for instance, should be able to, first of all, defend themselves in a real fight, and then B, hang with other blue belts in a competition or in a grappling situation. That's kind of how I judge that, and that's and it's the same with different as the ranks go up. So what I'm looking for, and there's also the issue of character and sort of loyalty to the gym organization. It's like you don't want to put too much time and effort into promoting people if they're just not good people. Right. I think that's something that's overlooked with a lot of sort of distance education programs. Like, I want to know people, because once you give them that rank, your name is forever attached to them, for better or for worse. So you need to be careful about who, and I've made mistakes in the past, but it's you want to be careful about who you give rank to, so that you want them to be tough, you want them to be skilled, and you want them to be honorable people.
Yeah, and I'm all about the stripes myself, speaking of which, in an art that takes as long to get your blue belt as it does to get your black belt in a lot of other arts, I think it's really kind of necessary to, get that motivation and see, hey, look, I've progressed, I've got 1, I've got 2, I've got 3, now 4 stripes. This is judging my progression as a fighter, as a person. I just think that's a good thing, to your point. So, Old School Jiu-Jitsu on Insta, man, I've been following this for a little bit now, and I really like the content that you guys are putting out. When did you start doing that, and what are your plans for the future, specifically with the Instagram account?
Well, with the Instagram account, I started about a year ago with that, and it's grown quite a bit. And we've got 14,300 something followers, I think, and we've got a Facebook group as well with almost 30,000. And so the point that what we're trying to do is to create a community of people who still train and believe that jiu-jitsu is primarily for self-defense, right? So it's still that aren't caught up in the flashy sports stuff and that are interested in the history and lineage and the positive impacts that jiu-jitsu has. So in essence, you know, looking at jiu-jitsu as a fighting martial art as opposed to a sport or exclusively a sport. And so what we're looking for, and we are looking for contributors as well as we're making our own material, and we're putting that out. Like we're writing. Like I said, I just finished this book. I'm working on a new book as well. We've got a YouTube channel that just went up, and we're going to start putting content on there. And I mean, we've got some content, so you guys can go follow us on YouTube for sure, because we're going to be adding things. So we've got a lot of high-powered instructors that are behind us that are starting to send us material, and we're actively looking for contributors because we want this to be a community-sourced type of page, type of group where we're helping get this information out. I mean, we're providing information, but we're also disseminating information that maybe some of these old school guys, because the sport jiu-jitsu is flashy and it grabs people's attention, and a lot of times it's hard to find things about just the old traditional how do you fight jiu-jitsu. It's like if you look things up, it's hard to even find instructional material on it.
Yeah.
You almost have to go into the MMA side. So what we're trying to do is to actively promote that side of jiu-jitsu. So we see it, you know, they're obviously building their Instagram account. We'll be adding more products, coming out with more books, merchandise, and then soliciting things that other people might want to either publish, you know, through us, or have content that's using our platform to get them views and get them, you know, some recognition for what they're doing. So we got a lot of different types of projects, and then we've got a contributor information. So if people want to be a contributor, they can get in contact with me through the Instagram or through old school bjj0@gmail.com. And also we have, if you go to the website, oldschooljujitsu.org, there's a become a contributor, and I have a huge list of things that we're looking for, you know, photos, old school photos, video, all this stuff, and as well as people making videos that can help promote what they're doing in their gyms. Because a lot of the old school guys, they don't have giant gyms, you know.
Yeah.
They're still training. They're still training out there. So we're trying to help everybody grow and make it a win-win situation.
Now, I just want to say on behalf of all martial artists out there, specifically martial artists like you and I, who really want to train for the fighting self-defense aspect, I want to say thank you for that, because, you know, there's, like you said, there's not a lot of that out there in the BJJ community these days, not enough at least. So I think that's really great what you guys are doing as far as bringing the whole, you know, warrior hand-to-hand combatives concept back into BJJ MMA. That's really cool. Now, your book, Old School BJJ, how can we find that? Is it on Amazon?
So the Old School Jiu-Jitsu Manifesto is available on our website, oldschooljujitsu.org. So we have that, and we have some T-shirts as well that are pretty cool. That say "Respect Your Roots" on the back, nice. With the Old School logo on the front. You can also go to Amazon. I have it up on Amazon, and I have it up in quite a few different countries because we get a lot of followers from Brazil, and international shipping is difficult. So we've got got it available on Amazon in both paperback and Kindle.
Great. I would just encourage everyone out there. I don't sell on anything on Amazon, but I've heard they kind of take a cut. So if you can go to Old School Jiu-Jitsu, Old School Jiu-Jitsu or Old School Bjj.org.
It's oldschooljiujitsu.org.
If you can go to oldschooljiujitsu.org and get it there, probably for the best, just to help support the cause there. I don't know, but I would assume that's the case. But
definitely. If you can order from our website, that would be great. And we actually are doing like next day shipping. Like we're making sure we get it out the next day. So
great. Awesome, man. So I want to thank you from me to you for coming on here and giving us some old school wisdom about this stuff. Definitely has been an eye-opening experience and a pleasure to talk to you, man. And I hope to definitely have you back on in the future. If anything comes up, we kind of tend to ask guys to come back on as far as, subject matter experts and all of that. So, if you're ever interested in coming back on, we'd love to have you.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on here.
All right, guys. So thanks for listening to me sitting down with Brian from Old School BJJ. Next, we're going to be having on Chris from Staying Safe Self-Defense. You guys can check him out on Instagram beforehand if you like. His Instagram handle is stayingsafe_self-defense. Definitely check him out as well. He'll be coming on in the next week or so. Until next time, guys, please remember that you are your first and last line of defense, and I will see you on the next freaking podcast. Cheers, Mother Flowers.